Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Obscuring the game mechanics from your players can be the best thing that ever happens in your role-playing game experience, except when it's not. So I'm going to talk about my experience using these techniques, the pros and cons, what these techniques are, and encourage you to experiment with this because this might be for you, but it might not be for you, and you might have already done this, and you can tell me your experience. Now, the idea is that in some way, shape, or form, the mechanics are not going to be available to the player. And the biggest reason that people give for doing this is to increase in-character immersion. The idea that interfacing with these mechanics is going to break immersion in character, is going to take us out of the imagined situation, and that the system and the mechanics can become disruptive. Clearly one of the most disruptive mechanics of all are the meta currencies, the idea that you're using some kind of currency in the game to buy something. And at this point, it is literally, it's not out of game at all. It's very much in game with a capital G. It's just out of the imagined situation, out of the experience that the character would be having. It's definitely a player experience at that point, which can be very disruptive. All the other mechanics can be very disruptive for some players when it takes them, they're switching back and forth from being in the imagined situation and in the shoes of the character and going back and having to consult charts and tables and interpret the results of dice and all that kind of stuff. And, look on their character sheet, what do I roll for this, etc. And for some of us, that can be more disruptive than for others. Now, in some way, shape, or form, we've been doing this forever. Certainly the idea of the GM screen where the GM is rolling dice behind it and we're not telling the players, maybe what it's for, what the results are. That's been going on forever. Joe, the lawyer, my friend, just had a short that I saw where he's using the time-honored technique of rolling the dice behind the screen and kind of breaking a poker face for a second and going, and it's just to mess with the players. It's really not a roll for anything. But at that point, this is very much a player-player interaction. It has nothing to do with the in-game, situation. And so that's very much a totally different dynamic that's going on. Another one is just, calling for a roll without telling the player what they're rolling for, why they're rolling it. Just roll 2d6, Jason, and just tell me the result. And the idea that you're having the player do something, but you're not really telling them what it's for. It is for something, legitimately. And the last one is probably the most salient in my experience, is the idea where the GM rolls for something that the player manifestly would not, or the character rather, would manifestly not know whether they succeeded or failed. Things like, searching, did they detect a secret door? They're trying to be stealthy, all those kind of things where you wouldn't really know if you succeeded or failed at a task. And you can actually extend the amount of tasks that might fall under that, to like research and investigation, etc. But things where you just wouldn't know exactly how well you did. Also, classically, a lot of things used to be obscured, like as a matter of course, at least in the culture of play that I grew up with, and the idea of the difficulty of a roll. When you say roll for this, you know what you're rolling for, you know the skill or ability you're rolling for, but you don't know the difficulty. You don't know the armor class of the creature. You don't know, how hard it is to do a certain thing or how hard it is to walk across this plank, to use that same old tired example. And, later on, or in some cultures of play, this always existed, the difficulty or the target number or whatever you want to call it was right out there in the open. But for some of us, we didn't really do that. It was kind of hidden. But what if, with your group, you had nothing available to the players? There's no difficulties. There's no difficulty classes available. Everything that would be a player roll, well, the GM rolls for instead. So you simply just state your actions. What if you didn't even know the exact numerical value of your stats or your skills or your abilities? You kind of knew that you were sort of good or not very good, that sort of thing. Now, if you're somebody that wants to play the game as a game, that's not really a good option. That's not a terribly good option at all. And, that's kind of anathema for you. So I know a whole bunch of people that would just never go for it. So that was never an experience or an experiment that we tried, because they definitely want to, play the game and see the dice and all that kind of stuff. There are other things, as I played with people and we obscured the mechanics to a certain extent that I noticed. For example, I had friends that were very, concerned, like, what am I rolling for? If you're telling me to roll these dice at this point, it's so jarring for them to not know why they're rolling, what they're rolling for, what success or failure might be, even like maybe what the target number might be, that it completely disrupted not only the game for them, but even their in-character experience, because they got so concerned about that. I have other friends that definitely, I want to see the damn dices. I'm not going to name names, but they're so concerned. They want to see it. They want to see what we're rolling for, and it's a little bit, it can be kind of a excuse me, almost an idea of I don't want you to impose some kind of fiat, or you to cheat as a game master, or to force me in a direction. I want to know that things are fair. So because of that, it's going to be very disruptive to the entire experience unless I can see these results, see what we're rolling for the sake of fairness. Another interesting thing that I notice in some experiments is very often if a player doesn't know, maybe know their stat, or at least doesn't know what the results of the roll for, they can start to feel like maybe they suck. Maybe they're not as good as they thought they were. And this can be based upon things like, a misinterpretation of description on the game master's part, or kind of a lack of description on the game master's part, which I may have been guilty of from time to time, where you're not really describing things fully enough for the player to understand or make a judgment, or they're just having a hard time making that judgment. Very often I've found that the stats or the abilities or whatnot are an analog for our judgment, and that sometimes or like like for our competence, or the difficulty of a task, or the competence of the opposition, all that kind of thing. And for some of us, it's much easier and less jarring, and is actually easier for us to remain in character when we're looking at numbers as an analog for our judgment or our perception. And it's more of an effort to translate words into an analog for judgment. That sounds kind of ridiculous, or almost like it's reversed, but very often, words mean different things to different people, and we can even have them written down. And this is hard, and this is easy, and this is very hard, and this is near impossible. And for some reason, and I'm one of those people that if I feel like I need to have this information, that the numbers just make more sense to me, or are less jarring than the words. I don't look at everybody else in the real world and have numbers attached to them, but for some reason, it's easier for me to translate into that into the feeling of what these various competences or difficulties might be. Your mileage may vary. It might be more immersive, for you to not have those or for the descriptions, or to just not have anything at all. So it depends. And also there's things like the analog of rolling the dice to represent an action. My friend Anthony talks about all the time the idea of rolling dice as an analog for swinging the sword, or for doing the thing, or for jumping, where you're doing something physical. And this kind of actually gets you into the experience and helps to preserve or maintain an immersion in character and an immersion in the imagined situation. So it depends. Sometimes the very thing that you think you want, some kind of obscuring of the mechanics, may actually cause you less immersion and cause you more consternation as you're wondering, what's going on? Your mileage may vary. It might be the best thing in the world for you. I'm certainly a person that prefers not to roll for myself when my character manifestly would not know the results. I don't have a problem with that. But sometimes I prefer to have some kind of numerical representation of everything, even if I'm not rolling the dice, just so I can have a judgment. Whereas words might not work. I said that before, but you know what I mean. For you, it might be completely different. It's a very complicated, complex topic, and it's something that you have to talk about with your group and try. You might love it. You might hate it. You might kind of like it and realize you need to tweak it a little bit. But it is one of those tools or sets of techniques that's worth examination, because it might be just what the doctor ordered. Or you might decide, if we ever do this again, I'm never playing with you. Take it easy, kids.